So, good afternoon, everybody. My name, as you know, is James Ball, and I'm the Special Projects Editor of The Guardian. If there is one running theme of this year, it is whether we can have any right to privacy online, whether that's from hackers, whether that's from Facebook and advertising marketers, or whether that is from Stewart's former employer and at the NSA or the UK equivalent GCHQ. And as recently as today's newspapers, we have the new head of GCHQ putting his cards pretty firmly on the table and saying privacy is not an absolute right in a world where we have threats from ISIS, where we have all kinds of issues that the spies would like to be able to dig into. And he said the tech companies have to get a special relationship with the governments to, help out and play nice. So, Matthew, is that something that should be happening?
Well, I think that we're about to enter what is really the second crypto wars. And a story that you broke with The Guardian showed how the NSA and GCHQ were actually attacking the infrastructure of even private companies like Google and literally drew a little smiley face on a slide showing this is how you can defeat Google's encryption by putting the monitoring systems there. And that was really a shot across the bow for companies like Google, Apple, my company Cloudflare, where we said, this is a time where we're in the trust business, and our users need to be able to trust that their data is safe with us. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is ensure that even we aren't able to see that data as it flows through our system. And so I think that while in the past there might have been willingness for a lot of tech companies to work with law enforcement or surveillance companies, I think that those days are quickly behind us.
So, and what's your take on that phenomenon?
So, I was in the first crypto wars. I can show you my tattoo. And everybody remembers that their own way. But it did not end with everybody saying, okay, let's just put strong encryption everywhere. It turned out that companies did not want to buy strong unbreakable encryption that would make sure that every single one of their employees could communicate with anybody with utter security, even vis-a-vis the corporation. A lot of regulators wouldn't allow them to do that. A lot of countries said, we don't want unbreakable encryption in our country. BlackBerry RIM pioneered really the same business model that Google and Apple are pursuing now. Let's see if we can put in end-to-end encryption. And it ended kind of not well for BlackBerry in the sense that when they went to places like India or the UAE, let alone China and Russia, they got a very bad reception. The government used a lot of its power to restrict their ability to sell until they started making the content of communications available to them. So there is a tendency to think, oh, well, once we've won the crypto wars in the United States or the English-speaking world, that's the end of it. That's actually just the beginning. That's the easiest of the wars to win.
But by introducing sort of systemic end-to-end encryption, as Google is doing, as Apple is doing, with iMessage on devices, are they being good corporate citizens or bad corporate citizens?
Time will tell. It's very comfortable, especially when you're an engineer and you live in a Silicon Valley techno-libertarian culture, to think that you're doing the right thing. But I've worked with a lot of these companies when they get requests from law enforcement to give them the contents of a communication. And no matter how liberal or enlightened you think you are, sooner or later you're going to find a crime that's using your equipment that is just so loathsome, you want to do everything you can to make sure that person is caught and punished. And I think that experience is going to happen in many of these companies. And it may be that the countries that are responsible for dealing with those crimes are going to make a big public deal out of the failure of the companies to cooperate. And that's when the full cost of this debate is going to be brought home for democratic publics. And the choice may be different from the one that's being made by default now.
I think that I think fundamentally, these companies are the plumbers that are making up the underlying works of the system.
Well,
so
if my plumber told me when I could go to the bathroom, maybe.
Well, except that, I think that the challenge is that I guess I would dispute the conclusion that there are some crimes that could pass across the pipes of the internet that are so loathsome that it is in the responsibility of the companies making those pipes to actually be monitoring it. Quite the opposite. I think that it's actually a pretty creepy idea that these companies are sitting and watching the traffic as it goes through those pipes. And I think that increasingly...
Wait a minute, do you use Facebook? Do you use Gmail? I mean, somebody is watching all of that.
Well, again, I think that, I think what I find remarkable is that someone like Apple has actually designed a system where if I'm sending a message from one iPhone to another iPhone, there is no individual sitting between those two transactions, including Apple themselves, and I have faith in the math that that's true, that is actually able to monitor that communication. And I think that is, I'm not sure that what we want to do is enable a set of private law enforcement that are taking on whatever the own biases of the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Tim Cooks or the Matthew Princes of the world that picks what traffic going through the pipes of the internet is good traffic and is bad traffic. And so,
But you don't want to empower the government to do that either.
Well, again, I think that what the government did, under your watch was...
Maybe afterwards.
Well,
so to look at sort of, say, a specific on this kind of thing, one of the kind of types of private communication certainly people like me care a lot about is between journalists and sources. And obviously, those have occasionally been pursued by governments for a long time. But now we've seen the US governments and the UK governments go to tech companies, go to the intermediaries in communications to get this. Journalists' sources can be handed over actually without warrants. Now, is that an appropriate sort of legal framework for us to be in, and is that an appropriate thing for tech companies to be trying to get out of that? If they're trying to encrypt, if they're trying to protect privacy in that way, they're essentially trying to say, you want communications, go to one of the parties, don't go to us. Is it not just the tech sector getting out the way?
The challenge here is, I come from the United States. There's a strong First Amendment protection. There's a strong protection of freedom of the press. That same protection doesn't exist, as Stewart mentioned, around the rest of the world. And so the minute that we start creating golden keys and locks that go into these different technologies, we all of a sudden start to reduce ourselves to the lowest common denominator, where if I'm Apple and I'm operating in China, if I've got the golden key that can unlock the communication and reveal where the source is, then that's problematic. And so again, I think that as these are increasingly global companies where we have customers in literally every country around the world, you don't want to put yourself as a tech company in a position where you're forced to, again, go to whatever the lowest common denominator is, assuming that the rest of the world is going to, again, respect freedom of the press or free speech rights.
But it does seem to me that when you look at the market for this, the market for absolute encryption is more limited than you would think. There are almost no companies that want to hand that to their employees. They have often obligations to securities regulators or other regulators to be able to tell them what their employees are doing, and they want to make sure their employees are not engaged in improper behavior, and the only way to do that is to be able to monitor those communications.
And yet BlackBerry, again, that really pioneered this, is holding on even in government circles because of the fact that they have truly the best end-to-end encryption.
Yes, but it's also encryption that the owners of the servers can undo. And so companies say, this is perfect for us because we can read it, nobody else can. But that is conditional encryption. That means they sold the golden key to the company and allowed the company to decrypt those as they chose.
Or to each individual, that if it's an individual or whatever.
If you want to buy your own server, yes.
Yeah,
right.
you should. And that, again, that seems like the market has, with a otherwise antiquated product, that BlackBerry holds on because there is an enormous market to the fact that people do want protection from the likes of you and GCHQ?
I don't know. They might be the likes of you. It's the private industry they're often as worried about as government. In fact, there was recently a survey in the United States, and after a year and a half of relentless Snowden journalism, when they asked them, who do you trust more, Google or the NSA, people said, NSA.
Well, that's so. Again, I think that the difference is that fundamentally Google is in the business of trust. Fundamentally, Apple is in the business of trust. Fundamentally, we are in the business of trust. And if we lose that trust, then people can leave and not deal with us anymore. I'm not sure how I can opt out.
Where would they go?
So now, Matthew, I'd actually like to sort of push you on this, because of course it's not as if people only worry about the NSA and GCHQ
Absolutely.
getting their privacy. It's frankly their neighbors, it's strangers on the internet, it's all sorts of people. And this has been a bad year for that. I mean, Target. So, of course, the videos in the introduction here, the naked photos, can the tech sector really keep any trust that it can protect people's data and protect people's privacy that way?
The challenges, whether, again, they come from the NSA or GCHQ or from a 15-year-old hacker breaking in and stealing photos, are enormous challenges. But what I'm actually encouraged by, the optimism that I have, is that when you read about new security vulnerabilities like Heartbleed, this Poodle vulnerability that came out the other day, those are actually direct responses where organizations like Google, there's a team at Google that is going line by line through a lot of the software that makes up the core foundation of the internet, and they're finding bugs and they're cleaning this up. And so an ancillary effect of what is happening from the Snowden revelations, from the Starlet's phones getting hacked, is that we are building a better internet. And what Stewart said backstage is, it's too bad that it took Snowden and fears over the U.S. government to inspire this, and not hacking from the Chinese government and others. And I'd agree with that. But it is, at the end of the day, the tech industry has woken up and is saying that fundamentally we are in the business of trust, and we're losing that trust if we're not building systems that are stronger and can actually keep our customers' data private.
So Stewart, though, is it not reasonable to say if tech companies can't protect people's data from small groups of Russian hackers, or frankly sometimes from 15-year-olds in their bedroom, can they really make any credible claim that they're protecting it from US intelligence agencies, Chinese intelligence agencies, Russian intelligence agencies? How credible is this idea that the tech industry is based on trust and can protect this data?
I think you're right. To some degree, the tech companies are picking big public fights with the US government and the National Security Agency because it looks good, as opposed to actually changing the ability of the government to get access to data. I think many of these fights over encryption are the same way. I would argue that the crypto wars, to the extent that they've been fought so far, have about as much outcome or relationship to the outcome of our security as the Soviet-Finnish War of 1939 had to the outcome of World War II. It turns out that you can have perfect encryption, and it does not make the system that much more secure, because the hackers work around the perfect encryption to get access through a variety of other bugs to your system, and they steal the data when it's unencrypted. Until we can find a way to work with data while it's encrypted, encryption is not going to be the principal security measure we need to keep hackers out of our data.
Then why is the GCHQ writing editorials in the Financial Times saying, "Dear technology companies, please don't encrypt things"? If that's true in that case, then with the resources of the NSA, with the resources of GCHQ targeted, you can still get to the data that you want.
Unfortunately, what it does is it raises the price of access. It doesn't prevent access. And so if you've got somebody who's willing to spend a lot of money, they can hack their way in, but they can't get it in the wholesale. Or if you've got people who are using military conscripts who work cheap to do it, you can do a lot of exploitation without ever having to decrypt anything.
But if NSA surveillance is as targeted as we're always assured it is, why is raising the cost of access an issue?
I'm sorry?
If NSA surveillance is as targeted as we're told it is, it's not bulk surveillance, it's very measured, it's very careful, why is raising the cost of access a problem?
Surveillance as it's been practiced by Western governments, the gathering of signals intelligence had a big bulk communication, you collect a lot and then you go looking, as opposed to picking your targets and then exploiting the targets. A lot of the attention to end-to-end encryption and the building encryption in is designed to make sure that data when it's moving cannot be exploited. That is more hostile to Western intelligence gathering than to either Russian or Chinese styles of gathering intelligence, which is why it's a little bit unfortunate that Western companies would devote most of their effort to that kind of security measure.
What I think is really interesting is that the bulk surveillance programs that were created in the United States and again furthered by organizations like GCHQ, when they were originally, the original conception behind a lot of these that stem back to sort of the 2001 era, it was inconceivable that you would simply record everything and then look into what has happened. And so technology often has this effect of either undercutting or amplifying the effect of the law. And I think what we can probably both agree on is that the power of the laws that were written back in the 2001 era were amplified by the technology industry that allowed you suddenly to literally record everything and do analysis on that. It seems that if we're talking about costs, at the minimum, what we should be doing right now is having a conversation as a society on what sort of costs with the new technologies that we have in place are we willing to bear in exchange for this, and that unfortunately the law hasn't kept up with what the technology is allowing again an organization like the NSA to do.
The problem with that argument is you could have made that argument in 1975 when there was a big scandal about the FBI maintaining clippings files. Probably because it competed with the press, but they maintained clippings files on famous people so that they could go back and see what they had said that was embarrassing 30 years ago. They were the only government agency that could do that, and there was a big scandal, and they were told to knock it off and only do it when they had a predicate for investigation. And you could have said, well, let's make sure that we keep the cost of doing that at about the same level. And that would have resulted in saying that everybody other than the FBI could use Google to look people up, but that the FBI should go back and use the same work factor that it was using in 1975, which was enormous. In the end, we expect the people that we think are going to protect us from crimes and terrorism to be able to use the same tools that Google or Facebook or any other ordinary tech user can use. We're not going to say we want them to run in shackles while the rest of us are running in sneakers.
So I'd just like to sort of step us back a little bit and sort of ask, is there an issue around essentially the whole business model of the big internet companies, which is essentially to collect huge amounts of user data in order to usually to sell targeted advertising? And this, firstly, people have concerns about how tech companies themselves use this data and their privacy from them, but also does it not just create such appealing targets for intelligence agencies that it's there? Is there a broader problem about the fact that actually on the internet personal data is currency?
Well, again, I don't know that that's I think that that's Google's business model, that's Facebook's business model, that's not Apple's business model, that's not our business model. Apple's business model is to sell phones that are cool and provide the functionality that their users want. Our business model is to keep the sites that use Cloudflare safe and secure no matter what is attacking them, and people pay us to be able to do that. So I'm not sure that, I think that there definitely is a trade-off in some of these businesses that are saying, we're going to be able to monetize some parts of the data, but I don't think that you can say in broad strokes that across the board every tech company is about challenging privacy. In fact, Microsoft and Apple are really attacking Google specifically on that front. What is, I think, challenging is that the vast majority of users say, yeah, we're okay with it, and we're actually willing, we'll fight and scream when it's up, but give me my free search results and give me my free Gmail.
Well, and not just the free services, so that everybody who's used Google now has probably been told, you know, there's a wreck on the highway to the airport, you better leave now for your flight. If you get a couple of those, you say, wow, I really want Google to know when my flights are. That's a choice we all make, and what's, I think, troubling for people in the privacy community is just how cheap we will sell our privacy, how cheap a price we'll sell it for. As it gets easier and easier to collate massive amounts of data that you've stored, that you can analyze it, you can store it cheap. Business models like Gmail are going to be built on the idea that I only need a tiny advantage out of using this data to have a viable business. And inevitably, people will flock to those businesses because they like the services they're getting.
So, Stewart, I would just like to push you on one thing. You both kind of referred to the fact that we're in Crypto Wars Part 2, or maybe Part 3 coming up, you know. So it's going to be a war with a lot of sequels. But there's an interesting position for the US government in particular, in that a lot of the sort of the best privacy technologies are actually receive a fair bit of funding from the US State Department and the BBG. I mean, is the US government fighting both sides of the same war?
Sure, Tor was invented by the Navy, basically, it's true. The State Department has funded some of the tools that are used, that have been used in the color revolutions, or to get around the Great Firewall in China. There are ways to reconcile it, but the fact is that reflects the fact that the crypto wars are mostly being fought between the American government and American companies. We are genuinely torn on this issue.
So it's quite hard to win a war when you fight both sides, though, isn't it?
Well, somebody's going to win it, and it'll probably be either an American company or the American government. So it's easy to win, too.
So is it fair to say that this kind of new crypto wars and this encryption everywhere, is it a detriment to Western governments and a help to more invasive societies, or is it a benefit to everyone?
I think that it's actually, I'm not as nihilistic as Stewart, in that, I think that there is a real clear benefit to everyone. I mean, we're really proud at Cloudflare that we doubled the size of the encrypted web overnight. And there are a lot of different companies that are working on building more and more cryptographically secure technologies, making sure that you can trust the technology as it's online. Whatever the story of the day is, whether it's network neutrality, whether it's censorship in China, whether it's the surveillance in the United States, all of these things at some level, if we can make sure that as traffic is flowing through the pipes, that's secure, that really benefits us all. And I think that that's something that every technology company should be working towards.
And I think that's a nice note on which to end it. Thank you very much, Stewart Baker and Matthew Prince.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's shake hands.